Do you call yourself a hacker?
Are we starting?
Yeah. Yes, I am. Do you call yourself a hacker?
No, I think that the term's been watered down over the years. It's, when you look at the original definition of hacking, and I'm sure it's subjective and there's many definitions, but it's basically about getting technology to maybe do something it wasn't designed to do, and just being able to come up with creative ways to make things happen. But like the term hacking, when you think of a hacker, it could be someone in the space of the hardware world, making changes to devices and firmware and the chips, and then of course up to the software side of things. Like a lot of the work that I've done over the years, especially in the last 10, 15 years, has been around identifying zero-day vulnerabilities, which a zero-day is a vulnerability that someone discovers in an operating system or other, and you're hoping no one else has discovered that before. And if you're the only one in the world that knows about that vulnerability, and you can determine if it's weaponizable, and you can actually weaponize that into a working exploit that allows us to, take over a computer or grab the credentials off a system, whatever it might be, then that's what one example of a definition of a zero-day. And so that's kind of the space I've been working in for the last, say, 15 plus years, in things like browsers like Internet Explorer when that was around, and Edge and Google Chrome and the other big ones like Safari. And then also in operating systems like the Windows kernel, and identifying vulnerabilities that could potentially allow for like privilege escalation, where if you're a regular user, you can promote yourself up to administrator or system, or other things remotely or locally. And the price tags for those things, since the security has improved so much over the last couple of decades, has really gone through the roof as to what you can get for these working exploits if it's something that's highly sought after. But back to your question, I mean, I've done, as a kid especially, things more on the black or gray hat side of the fence, and then of course as an adult, things more on the gray to white side of the fence. But I work in cybersecurity, and obviously I do hacking, but I don't consider myself a hacker because I think that term's just been overused too much.
How did you get into it?
Yeah, it's a good question. As a child, I was lucky enough to have internet in the house and computers in the house at a young age, thanks to my dad. And of course, when he's at work, and I'm sure he's going to watch this, but using those devices to be able to do things and find a close network of friends. Like, for example, I worked at McDonald's at 14 and a half years old because I wanted to make money. And I met this individual at high school I was going to, who was a very introverted person, and kind of someone just kept to themselves, no one really talked to, and he was working there. And so I had a chance to talk to him, and I said, what do you do in a computer lab all the time at school? And he's like, I'm writing a polymorphic mutation engine. And at the time I didn't know what that was, and he explained it to me. And so from that, you start to form a group of people who have a common interest. And back then, of course, you hear the popular names like Kevin Mitnick and others, where due to the lack of security, where you call up a computer on its modem, and if there's passwords required at all, it's something very simple like admin. That was novel at the time, but very simple. So I think that was my early introduction. And then that led into game hacking, where you could open things up with like a hex editor and make changes. If you can identify the offsets in the code where things like your gold or your mana is stored, you can give yourself like unlimited amounts of money. And then I had some relationships in my life that were people who I was dating worked in the space of technology, like doing routing and switching and Microsoft administration and hanging out, and that's another thing. I hung out a lot in the goth industrial community in Washington, D.C. area and Baltimore area where I was growing up. And it just seemed that, and still today, a lot of people in that space tend to have an interest in cybersecurity. So that's kind of where it all started.
And you went to school, you graduated high school and did college, I assume?
I graduated high school. College wasn't really seen as an option, I guess, for me. I didn't think it was anyway. And so I didn't really mentally prepare myself for that. And I remember seeing other people going to college fairs at the school, and I was like, oh, what are they doing? And I had no idea. And so I went to some community college classes at first, but that was more focused on criminal justice. I was interested in that topic, but I never graduated from it. And then started my career, moved to San Francisco, and then it's a bucket list item, so I went back and got a bachelor's and then a master's just to have it.
Mm-hmm. And you've made money as a security, what do you call it, consultant?
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about cybersecurity, I mean, fortunately for me, I got into it right when it was blowing up, which that's always the place you want to be when something's about to get booming, like now with AI and machine learning. So as a career, working as anything in the IT space, from network engineer and systems administrator, most things now you have to have a level of cybersecurity proficiency to be effective at your job. And then, of course, a lot of people will use that as an opportunity to go full time into a security role. And some people come straight from university these days because university programs now have heavily have security in there in the curriculum as part of the program. But as a career, you can make a pretty good amount of money. It's easy to get six figures right out of the gate from college. And some people might disagree with that, but it depends where you live, of course, and kind of your area of focus. And one of the things that draws a lot of us to cybersecurity is it's such a vast space. I mean, you can focus on machine learning and AI, or you can focus on vulnerability research and exploit development. You can focus on malware, forensics, all kinds of different spaces. And a lot of us will tend to do some consulting at some point and kind of leave home being a company where we built up our skills a bit and build up your resume, go out to the consulting space where you can make a lot more money. For me personally, I saw vulnerability research as something that, and penetration testing and red teaming and stuff as well, but vulnerability research in particular, you can make a lot of money. And exploits that, back in like 2013, 2014, I would say was the years where I was writing the most 0 days. And I have a lot of friends who are doing the same. And it's because browser security and other application security still wasn't quite there. And nowadays, it's incredibly different. It's improved so much. And so what I could have sold and gotten $20,000 for a 0 day that would say you visit a web page that's got some malicious JavaScript in there, you don't see anything, but if your browser's vulnerable to that, then it exploits it, it's transparent to you, and gives us remote access to that computer. $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on a good day back in 2013, 14. And then the operating system vendors and the browser developers drop in these things called exploit mitigations, which are basically controls that work together. Like if you had a Venn diagram and you overlap the circles in the different categories of these mitigations, it's a layered defense approach where you have to assume that any one of them can be compromised or you can circumvent it. But as you add more and more together, it makes it quite difficult, if not impossible, to, even though you've identified a vulnerability that's exploitable, you can't get it to execute, or you can't make what you want to happen because these mitigations are protecting it. And all of that research and development and improvement over the years has taken what was 10, 20, 30,000 US dollars and propelled that up to north of 10, 20 million dollars sometimes today.
Mm. And you've been on both the black hat side as well as the white hat side, sounds like.
I mean, they're subjective terms, of course. I, for the most part, have stayed out of trouble and used the powers for good because especially there's enough interesting things to do and there's enough money to be made, and that's the way it should be, to where you don't have to go down the dark path to make that money. Obviously, if you want to get into like the dark web side of things and how that all operates, it's different, but there's enough there.
What kind of dark things are being done before we get into fighting that? Well, I mean, obviously on the exploit development side, there's this one, I won't name any particular companies, but there are these companies called exploit acquisition companies, and they're available out there, and some of them are based out of different countries with different hacking laws, different extradition laws. Some are in Dubai, some are in Russia, and some of them are like, hey, we are a non-NATO friendly company, which means that if you sell this vulnerability that you've discovered and weaponized to them, they're going to pay you much more money than you can probably get from an ethical company, which is unfortunate, but you're potentially committing an act of treason because you know that they're going to use that code
to then potentially go after your own government. There's been some cases, one in particular, where a journalist in China was unfortunately killed, and there was a 0-day involved because obviously if you're in a country where there's a lot of government oversight, and they're really interested and protective about the news that comes in and the news that goes out, they're going to track these journalists. And they were using this to be able to track this individual, the things they were saying, access to photos. There's a particular software called Pegasus that's been around for some time now, where if you identify a vulnerability in like an iPhone or an Android device, but this one in particular, I believe, is just iOS. So there's a couple parts to it. There's the exploits that you have to chain together. It's not just one anymore that can yield you access to a system and give you administrator control over it. Sometimes it's north of like 5, 6 exploits, 0 days chained together, and it's called an exploit chain. The ones that are highly sought after are called 0-click, which means no user interaction is required. I would text to you a malicious SMS message or iMessage, and it would execute without your involvement. And if we get that working, and that's the type of thing people will pay millions of dollars for, then the payload executed is some type of a command and control, like rootkit type thing that basically allows continued access to that device, access to the camera, access to your photos, your microphone, and pretty much everything.
What kind of things are going on today that people may encounter that are somebody doing something malicious?
I mean, one thing that's interesting is as things get more difficult and as the security companies like Google and Microsoft and Apple and others, it's night and day from what it was 20 years ago. It's very impressive, the amount of security and the amount of talent that they have there. And of course, when that happens, it does a couple of things. It drives up the prices on if someone is able to get an exploit working, and like I was just describing, but it also, attackers, just like most people, go after the low-hanging fruit. So once it gets too difficult to exploit a certain target that we're used to exploiting, because there's been so much focus on it from a security perspective, we go to the next thing. And often that goes after the user. The end user is often seen as the weakest link. So there's a lot of devices out there nowadays that allow you to just like plug into the computer, rogue wireless access points and things like that, where you don't even know something is happening. It's at such a low level where you're plugging in a cable into something and it's exploiting you and you don't even know it's happening. It's too easy. So I guess it's kind of interesting where in some ways security has gotten so good and so effective, but yet at the end of the day, there's still these just basic techniques that we can use to get access to what we want.
You were showing me the cable.
Yeah, if you go on YouTube or anywhere else and you look for these things, they're everywhere. But this is one example. Like it's a cable called OMG Cable from Hack5, which is a company, and every good pen tester, red teamer, or even person who's a hobbyist has one of these things where, on my left, this is a regular iPhone cable, and on my right, this is the OMG cable, and the difference is they'll both charge, they'll both do data transfer, but inside the actual USB part is a wireless access point and other things needed to be able to do anything from drop a script and execute code on a device that plugs into it, do things like keystroke logging. So a lot of people will use these to plug in their keyboard to charge it. If it's a wireless keyboard to the computer, it can capture those keystrokes. You can inject keystrokes. It's got an access point built into it, which is one of the most impressive parts, where there's this one tool out there called Ducky or Rubber Ducky that's been out for a long time, and it's a hacking tool that allows you to write scripts. And again, you would normally preload it, and you can preload this thing as well, to where if someone then plugs, and you probably heard this before, where, don't pick up a USB drive that you find on the ground and just plug it into your computer. Because if it's one of these rogue ones, it could have scripts that auto-execute. But this one's more impressive because certain versions of it, they've got an access point built into it, which means that, if you're at a hotel, I mean, how many times have you gone into a hotel room and you've seen a cable sitting there, someone left behind, or these are expensive, right? I mean, a regular cable's $20 or more. This one's like $200, I think, for the Pro version. But if you leave it around, someone's going to use it. This is why you've probably been told before, don't ever use those public charging stations. Don't plug into the airplane that's got a USB charger or the slot machine that's got one in there, because you never know when one of them has something like this in there. And from it, you could do things like interact with the computer, force it to go to a web page, run certain things, access photos. There's a community-driven, basically, group that people will write what's called the payloads, which are essentially the scripts and the things that you would want as an attacker to have executed on a target system. So you can go and preload these things, or you can connect remotely, as long as you're within proximity, to the access point, and you can do things on the fly there. So that type of stuff is just really important to watch out for. And just bring your own power bank. Only use trusted cables that you purchase yourself or from a trusted friend.
Are things getting easier for people looking to cause problems?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, because obviously anytime these tools are created, a lot of times they're expensive at first, but then the price gets driven down or it gets commoditized or whatever. But anybody can buy these things. I know, like in Canada, they tried to actually ban, I think they did ban this thing called a flipper. And this is a device that hobbyists and pen testers and attackers all have as well. And by banning something like that, you're just putting you're treating a symptom. You're not really going at the root cause. Anybody with the knowledge can go get a Raspberry Pi or some other device and create one of these things themselves. But when you package it up and make it so accessible and easy for someone where it just works outside of the box, obviously people with bad intentions can use it to do horrible things. I mean, it can make it look like you made a phone call you didn't, a text message that you didn't, put things on your device that weren't supposed to be there. It's funny, a while ago, so I'm a musician as well, and I've been in bands my whole life, and thankfully, like my dad and others tell me, don't just be a musician, you gotta hedge yourself and make sure you make money, because in the music world, it's very difficult to make money. But my point was, back in 2000, I think it was 9, I could be a year or two off, maybe seven or 9. I was in a studio called NRG, which is up in North Hollywood, down here in LA. And we were lucky enough to be in there with Linkin Park. And they were finishing up the Minutes to Midnight album. So it's the first time I got to meet Chester Bennington and become friends with him and all. But I was talking to Jay Baumgartner, the owner, and to other folks, and obviously I know a lot of people in the LA area as well that do hacking, and there was a paparazzi who had hacking skills who was going around and remotely trying to break into the access points, the wireless access points of celebrities or wealthy people up in the hills. And obviously when you buy an access point today, it's got different types of security like WPA3, but the older ones like WEP and others, they weren't very secure at all if people did turn on encryption at all. And you could essentially from the road use a special antenna and break into their home network. And obviously, you've seen in the past, a lot of celebrities like to keep things they probably shouldn't on their laptops, whether it be videos and photos, and those can be sold to TMZ or whatever. But there was this individual or individuals going around and doing that. And that took a small degree of skill and knowledge to be able to use these special antennas and use the right tools to potentially crack the encryption and that type of stuff. And with these more simpler options that we have, like I just showed with the cable, it's so easy and people just blindly trust these cables and it will charge and pass data, it looks normal. It's easier, right? So where some things get more secure, as I was saying before, some things are getting worse.
And this can be done like on every level. I mean, like just kids in other countries in the sticks can be doing this kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, again, I mean, like I say, Canada.
You don't have to be like a professional. That's
No. It's I forget what the term is, but again, people like things to just work out of the box, not outside the box, but out of the box when you buy something, whether it be an IT device or a printer or a TV, smart TV. If it's complex, people get frustrated. And oddly enough, that's what leads to these whole like scammer site things where you've probably seen it on YouTube where there's scammer payback channels where one of their tricks is to rely on the fact that if there's complexity in setting something up that's IT related, people will go to Google. There's Google ads that pop up that are from the scam companies that then target these individuals looking for help with their printer or something else. They offer remote support. They use some remote control software to help you, assist you. And then meanwhile, they're clearing out all your stuff on your computer and they're getting you to log into your bank and editing the HTML to make it look like they transferred you money when they didn't. But that's like a different road to go down. But yeah, again, there's there's nothing stopping people from buying this stuff, and most of it's affordable enough. And if you can't afford it, you can make it yourself if you know how to do that, to where it's accessible to anyone. So.
And there's money to be made.
Yeah, I mean, again, like that cable, I think I paid $200 for it.
No, but I'm saying.
By
hacking and getting at people's
absolutely
private stuff.
There was, it just popped into my head, but like extortion comes to mind.
Right.
You can target anybody you want. I mean, how easy it is to type somebody's name in Google or use these sites and use OSINT, open source intelligence tools, to be able to locate where somebody lives. You try your best to hide yourself and make it so people can't find your address, your phone numbers, and they always can. So with that in mind, it empowers people to be able to target anyone they want. I mean, historically, I would say that most of us aren't going to be the target of a campaign where someone's paying $9-10 million for this zero-day exploit chain. We're not that important, most of us, but we don't have to. Like, it's just so much easier than that. I mean, those are used by nation states. It's not typically some random person. But the extortion thing got me thinking. I don't know why, but I figure we go there anyway. On the dark web, I don't know if you read about it, Mark, but Incognito was this dark web website where it got shut down this year, and the individual, I think he went by the handle Pharaoh. I think his name was Lin or something. He's out of, where was he from? I think Taiwan, I believe. I think it was Taiwanese. And he actually worked for the Taiwanese government. And he ran this dark web marketplace. And it's where mostly drugs were being sold back and forth. But the reason extortion made me think of that is because he actually ended up extorting the buyers and the sellers at the end of it. And I don't know if you want to talk about that story a little bit, but it's quite fascinating because I watch your channel and it's amazing. And a lot of the people, are buying drugs on the street, things like fentanyl and other items, but these dark websites make it so easy. And obviously you can buy fake stuff, you can buy real stuff, and talk about money to be made. There's a fortune to be made there. And that individual, I think Pharaoh was his name, is now going to serve a life prison sentence at age 23 years old. He made millions. He found himself to be a victim where some hackers actually cleaned him out by tricking him, and he got angry about that. They stole all of his crypto. And so that's when I think he decided to pull what's called an exit scam, which if you don't know how these dark net marketplaces work, they have to earn the trust of people. And I've worked a lot with law enforcement and others in this space, so I know quite a bit about it. And it's a fascinating area. Talk about like information security and hacking in general, and having so many different paths you can go down. Working on the dark web with doxing people and trying to identify who these individuals are in the real world on the clear net versus the dark net, it's a fun job. But what these people do, these people being the ones who, like, if you wanted to start a dark web marketplace, which I don't recommend, would be you have to earn the trust of the individuals, because obviously everyone's very skeptical. There's something called OPSEC, or operational security. It's critical for everyone. There's this thing called the Darknet Bible, I think, but it's basically an OPSEC document that teaches people how to safely go and make transactions on these dark web marketplaces to buy things like drugs. And even though its target audience are buyers and sellers of this illicit substances, it also is very useful for just general security use cases, because it teaches you all the mistakes that you could potentially make that could lead to your arrest or discovery, like this individual from Incognito did. So I believe this individual, a couple other famous dark web marketplaces like Silk Road and White House Marketplace, they all got taken down, or they closed shop. And when that happens, it gives an opportunity for these other marketplaces to pop up. But you have to earn the respect and trust from the community. So there's a site called Dread on the dark web, and it's kind of like Reddit for the dark web. And it basically, there's hacking channels on there. So you like on the dark web, these marketplaces, you can buy hacking tools like ransomware and stuff like that. You can hire consultants to do bad things. You can obviously go down worse places like child pornography. But one of the main uses for the dark web is the sales of narcotics. And so he went on to Dread, and most of these posts you can still go and find today, earned the trust of people, tried to like really include the community on decisions that he was making. And obviously no one knew who he really was. He was going by this pseudonym or handle, and he started up a store. and he invited well-known sellers who have sold on different platforms. You could get referrals and people to vouch for you. And then new people who wanted to join as a seller would have to pay some money, and they would go through basically, give us your resume, and then we're going to determine whether or not we think that you're the right kind of seller for this market. And then just to summarize, so I don't go into too much detail, a seller, for anyone who's not been there, it's just like an eBay store. You have your products, you could sell a wide array. Like some of these sellers will sell anything from marijuana to fentanyl to prescription drugs. Some of these sellers are people who work at hospices. They're doctors, they're pharmacists who are somehow able to steal a product without getting detected. Because if you're gonna buy the real stuff versus the fake stuff, it's a huge price to pay. Like it's 10, 20, 30 times more expensive to buy something that you can trust doesn't have fentanyl in it, or trust. You still want to test it, obviously. But so they put their store up, and then they put their prices up and the quantity up, and then the buyers come in, and if they want to buy something from your store, they go in and they will click, just like you would on eBay or some other site. They would say how many they want to buy, and it would give them the price. Monero is the cryptocurrency that is the privacy coin, you could call it. Bitcoin, it's too easy to trace things, track things, and dox people. But Monero is one of the ones that law enforcement has a real tough time cracking because it's got a lot of privacy built into it, a lot of interesting cryptography techniques and protections that make it near, if not impossible, to understand who was the sender and recipient and that. So Monero is the preferred, obviously, cryptocurrency on the darknet. So if you're a user, if you're a seller, these marketplaces give you a wallet address, and anybody who's used Monero or Bitcoin, you can have your wallet and you can generate as many addresses as you want. And it's kind of smart to do it that way. So you use one address per transaction, so it makes it more difficult to track. And if somebody wants to buy something, the marketplace gives them an address. They send the payment using their Monero wallet, and that payment goes into escrow, which escrow is basically the Bitcoin wallet of the marketplace owner, which in this case for Incognito was this individual Pharaoh, I think it was called. And so the transaction goes through, the seller gets notified that someone's purchased a product, they know it's in escrow, they mail the product, then the buyer goes on once they receive it and releases escrow, or it times out if they don't do that. And then the money is available to go to the seller. And so what these marketplaces will do, a lot of them, is they'll wait until they have a huge customer base and they have so much money in escrow, which is, again, their crypto wallet, and they'll do an exit scam. They'll just all of a sudden just shut down the marketplace, they take all the money, and this could be tens of millions of dollars. And even before they do this exit scam, they're getting a commission off the escrow, which is how they make the money in the first place. So many, many millions of dollars. And so this individual decided, I believe, to do the exit scam after he got ripped off by some hackers who cleared out his crypto. And he not only did the exit scam, but he extorted the sellers and the buyers and said, if you're a seller, you need to pay 10 to 20,000 US dollars. If you're a buyer, you need to pay some smaller amount of money. If you don't, we're going to take all the data that we have about your transactions and messages, and we're going to give them to law enforcement. And they made additional money this way. And the problem is that this goes back to the OPSEC topic I was getting into, where cryptography is very interesting, where it can protect you really well if you do it right, but it can also, if you trust it and it's not secure, obviously it can fail. So what these marketplaces will do is say, if you don't want to actually encrypt the message for the intended recipient yourself, we'll do it for you. You don't have to, we're just type in your message, click send, we'll encrypt it, it's all good. They weren't actually doing that. So that was what obviously made it so the extortion would work, because a lot of people get lazy. And the way cryptography works in this case is you get 2 keys per each person, I'll say. I'm simplifying this, but we use things like PGP, pretty good privacy. And the way the cryptography works is it's a 2-key asymmetric crypto system where you get a private key that you always protect, you get a public key that is something you don't have to protect as much. So if you wanted to send me a message, I would give you my public key. You would encrypt your message with that key, send it to me, and then only the private key that I own can decrypt that message. Even the key that was used to encrypt it cannot decrypt the message, only my private key. So if that key is not compromised, even though the marketplace is being dishonest, if I go and actually encrypt the data before I paste that message into the marketplace, I know I'm safe in case of this extortion attempt. But at the end, this individual got caught. The different agencies from around the world worked together, and this guy made multiple OPSEC mistakes that are almost laughable and trivial. To think that if you're going to go down the path of something that money laundering, other things that carry life sentences are involved, you need to be the best when it comes to OPSEC, and almost everybody fails at some time.
How vulnerable are like regular people that are just living their lives?
With regard to cryptography and exchanging of messaging? Yeah. I mean, well-intended sites, I mean, we're just talking about the dark web, so obviously we have to assume the worst when it comes to that. Well-intended sites, and like when you're using things like logging into Gmail, I mean, these are very ethical companies, and the cryptography they use, partially it's dependent upon like the browser that you use to communicate with that, but mostly it's solid. Where crypto goes wrong in most cases is when a company decides to create like a proprietary encryption algorithm or cryptographic implementation. If they don't go with something that's trusted and true and tried and has been publicly scrutinized for years by brilliant cryptanalysts and cryptographers around the world, and they try to do it internally, they know this is called security by obscurity. Someone might think, well, if we do it inside and no one knows how we're doing it, that it's going to be harder for them to figure out what's going on and find vulnerabilities. But it's the opposite is true. And so I think that's where a lot of companies get themselves into trouble, where if you buy like a removable drive for saving files and it comes with an option to encrypt, that encryption implementation, that the software that's doing it might not be secure. Or if you have an alarm system in your house, everybody uses wireless now. It could be HVAC systems like air conditioning and things like that, or toll booth, transponders. All this stuff uses cryptography, but a lot of the companies that generate this stuff to cut on costs will do the least that they have to do. And a lot of the developers oftentimes don't have a strong enough understanding of cryptography to know why certain things are important. So I think it's like the lesser known or less thought of things are where the problems seem to exist more versus, oh, my iPhone encryption and stuff like that.
What's been one of the most sophisticated scams you've seen?
One of the most sophisticated scams. Wow. I mean,
or hacks or whatever.
Yeah, I mean the scammer payback stuff and all that. It's pretty basic. What they do is not novel. It's not impressive. It's typically counting on the fact that the end user are the ones who are the weakest link, and so. And they go after people like the elderly. They go after people who may not be strong in technology. Obviously, anybody who they think is vulnerable is who they target. And now with AI and machine learning coming into play, I'm sure you've heard of something called vishing, where phishing's been around forever and vishing's been around for a while as well. But where we send you an email that looks very convincing. Maybe you have a flight today and I catch you on the right day and it says your flight has been canceled or delayed. Click here to log in. And you fall for those scams and it takes you to a malicious website that's actually stealing your credentials. Like that stuff's been around forever, and a lot of people have gotten more savvy to that. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that when they use multi-factor authentication, where you use Google Authenticator to enter a code, or it sends you a text message to enter that number, that after you log in with your username and password, that second factor or form of authentication comes across as, oh, I feel good, I feel safe, I'm secure now. But there's very simple techniques you can use to do multi-factor authentication bypasses. There's tools like Evil Jinx out there. I'm sure some folks have heard of that. We're freely available, and what defenders rely on a lot of times is that if a hacker's trying to do something and break into your account, steal your money from your bank, whatever, and they're going after that communication between a phone or a browser and the bank, that certificates will come up that say it's invalid. This looks bad, get me out of here. And it's trying to protect you, and it does a pretty good job at it. But with these tools, you can actually very easily create something that is signed, it is valid, your browser won't complain about it. And so we can craft this stuff up either ourselves, or we can leverage AI and machine learning and stuff to help us too. I'll say something more about that in a moment. But now what was like partially convincing but came up with bad certificates and stuff is now really convincing and really well done and gets us around that multi-factor challenge from the attack perspective. And there are protections, things like YubiKeys or FIDO specifications, but most companies, most people aren't using that stuff, especially the end users. But with the machine learning component, or not necessarily machine learning, but AI component, vishing is what I was going to talk about briefly, which is if I make a phone call to somebody and it doesn't sound like the person who it's supposed to be, obviously you're not gonna fall for it, most likely. But now I can call you from a phone number that looks like it was from the person who it's supposed to be, and we can do voice cloning very easily. Talk about something that's been commoditized, that has, where the price point is really low now. Some claim you only need a few seconds of audio from the intended person. Tends to work better with people that don't have accents. Like the American accent's very boring compared to, say, a British accent. Or Christopher Walken, really cool voice is going to be harder to clone than someone like myself, where I'm easy to understand. So you get, 60 seconds is probably preferred. And we can pretext things. We can come up with things in advance and have it said to the person on the other end of the phone. And now it sounds like your kid. Now it sounds like the person who's trying to tell you they're in trouble, they're stuck, they got robbed, they need you to wire money or something like that. And these scams tend to be a lot more sophisticated, but also very accessible and easy to do by anyone with some very basic technical knowledge. But when you get into like asking me the most sophisticated hacks and things like that, it gets quite technical, is the challenge in talking about this stuff. A lot of us use reverse engineering tools and debugging, and also a lot as of late, I use machine learning to help me out, where you can have an open conversation with ChatGPT, for example, and you can have it aid you in your research and helping you understand very complex code analysis. And so like that becomes a big part of the role. There's one actually, because I had this thing here. I've mentioned this before, the flipper, and this has been out for a while. This is something called a Proxmark. It's just like, again, looks like little Raspberry Pis and stuff, but it's got things built into it. I still have to put out this video, and it won't be the first one that's been done. But these key cards at hotels are incredibly weak and poorly done. I've used those two tools at hotels, probably 9 out of the last 10 I've been in, and it's worked 100%. So I was at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas recently, and I wanted to play a joke, and I thought it'd be like a good video too, but I'm terrible about video editing, and I'm slow to get it done. But I had my friend record me on the phone, kind of inconspicuously, and I followed another friend into the elevator, and I had basically this guy, the Proxmark, on me, kind of in my pocket, and I intentionally stood really close to my friend who got on the elevator, because I was trying to get close to his little key card that you open a room with. And of course he's like, "Why are you standing so close to me?" And I was like, "Oh, don't worry about it, haha." And then he gets off on the floor and we follow him, and he's like, "Why are you following me?" We're like, "Our room's down here too, what are you talking about?" And we just pass him. Now we know what room he went in, but he didn't know we cloned his card. But there's encryption. Talking about encryption again, the encryption is incredibly weak, because to do things the right way, it's hard. It takes more administrative overhead and work and technical understanding, and it's more problematic and more troubleshooting involved. More things can go wrong the more secure the path you go down, especially if you don't have the technical support to help you in those situations. But went back to the room, used some tools very simply, and cracked the encryption in about 30 seconds, because oftentimes they use a lot of default pins when they load the cards. And I then used that flipper device to clone the cracked version of the card onto that flipper, and then just went back to the door. My friend was filming and got right in the hotel room, and he was in there like, "What the hell are you doing?" And it was done as a joke at first, but then I started to share that information with some people who work for the company. I work and teach for a company called the SANS Institute. I'm an author and the curriculum lead there, where we create these courses to learn how to do this stuff. And I was talking to some of the folks, and there was one woman in particular who was very concerned about what I had just done and very nervous about it. It's like, is it really that easy that someone can just, like some creep in a hotel elevator or wherever can just clone my card without me knowing it and break into my room that easily? And the answer is yes. Usually it's that easy. And I would say the majority of the hotels out there.
So we hear about data breaches a lot. What do you know about that?
Yeah, another great question. I mean, that's the cool thing about this. There's so much to talk about in this space. And I'm sure I'm going to leave here and be like, I wish I would have said this or that. But the data breach side of the house, that's another lucrative industry, if you want to call it that. So I'm glad you asked. But there are a lot of people out there, and I'm not picking on any nation, anything in general, but in some places in the world, it's just a fact that it's a lot harder to have to make money, and there's not as much opportunity. I was just watching a video yesterday on a plane about the opioid epidemic in Afghanistan, like with the Taliban of coming in and going out and coming in, and how they don't allow poppy to be grown, I don't think, anymore, and how there's a lot of drug addicts there, and they just don't have access to resources. And so I'm just talking about, and in fact, a long time ago, I was in Romania right before they joined the EU. And there were all these hackers there because it was difficult for them at the time to get visas and things to go to other places. And if not for just a trip, certainly hard to get like employment opportunities somewhere else. And so if you've got these skill sets, but you can't monetize it, what do? Do you just work a job that's not going to pay as well? Or do you look for opportunity even though it might cross an ethical line, which of course everyone has their own morals. And so data breaches is a good example where you've got people all around the world, and they have this opportunity where they know that if they're able to compromise a target website, a company, then they can steal the data and they could profit off of it. So there's Telegram groups, there's dark web forums and sites, there's different places where you can buy and sell things, but these Telegram groups are right out there in the open for anyone. And in fact, there's a Twitter or X page account called Dark Web Informer, and it just pulls data from Telegram and posts it. And what it's posting is someone just breached this store, someone just breached this hospital, someone just breached this bank, this retail store. They've got 100,000 records for sale, which includes PII, like personally identifiable information like social security number, credit card numbers, whatever it might be. Obviously, the better the data, the more valuable it is. And unfortunately, the number one breached vertical industry is healthcare, and it's been that way for a long time. And there are other ones that fall behind that, like academia and others. And there's various reasons as to why some vertical markets and industries tend to be less secure than others. But regardless, this data is valuable. So the bounty, it all depends on, it's like when you're selling a house. If you sell a house and you have an open house weekend and just the right buyers just don't show up that week, you get low offers. But then if you would have sold it a month later, you might have got double the money, which is crazy, right? It's a similar thing here where depending on what you're selling, it's also, there's a race condition here where the faster you can sell this stuff, and that works the same way in the exploit sales realm, with these exploit acquisition companies, the data is more valuable. And so I'm this person, I'm in some country where there's not much opportunity, I compromise a bank, I steal 1 million credit card records, which is not unreasonable at all. And then I post it on these Telegram sites or dark websites, whatever, and I say, I have this and I want this for it. I want $10,000, $100,000. And a lot of times it ends up being like an auction where someone like counter offers and they sell it. And you would think, oh, that happens occasionally. No, it's daily. Every single day, there are companies getting compromised. Their data's getting posted. Oftentimes, they don't even know there's a breach yet at their organization. There's something called a dwell time, which is basically how long an adversary has had access to your environment before detected. And that's their dwell time. And so sometimes they haven't even determined that they're compromised and their data is already being sold. And a lot of these companies aren't monitoring those areas to see if their data is being sold, because that could be one way you learn that you have a breach. And so it's pretty rampant. with regard to data breach and the sales of that data. Like, it's a big, big problem. It's similar to, in some of the stuff, again, I'm summarizing or simplifying, but a lot of companies have Slack or some other Discord or whatever, but Slack's a big one, right? That companies use to communicate between the employees. And there's an assumption of trust that if I'm talking to somebody in an internal Slack workspace, that they must work for the company. They must be trusted. That stuff gets sold. The access to that type of stuff gets sold as well, to where then I can pretend I'm someone who I'm not. I'm able to get access further and move laterally and all that stuff.
And I'm sure that child pornography, things like that, are alive and well on the dark web.
Unfortunately, yeah. So on the dark web, obviously it gets sensationalized a lot. One thing you have to assume if you go on the dark web is that everything is actually owned by a Fed. Like, you just assume that it's law enforcement because they're there. They should be there and they need to be there. Some of this stuff is not Feds. Some of it is Feds, regardless of whether or not who owns it. They're there, they're watching, and they should be. They're not really layers, like as you would think of an onion or something like that, but sort of, I guess logically anyway, the dark web has this site with the .onion extension. So if you try to go to a website like the .com, it's on the ClearNet, it's on the internet, and you can get there no problem. If you try to go to a site that's got a .onion extension, you can't get there unless you're connected with Tor. Tor is the onion routing. It's basically, if you can imagine a bunch of routers, and routers are these devices that route our traffic across the internet, preferably in the most effective way and quickest way possible. The onion routing realm, imagine a bunch of routers in a circle, and you draw a line between all of them so that they're fully meshed. And it intentionally, there's these things called entry nodes and exit nodes into the dark web. I mean, it's really just the internet, but it's a special area that's designed to kind of scramble things around. Normal traffic, it's supposed to be efficient as possible. Here, we intentionally bounce things around all over the place so that the origin is very difficult to determine. So I've actually been approached by, and it's one last thing we can talk about too, by different agencies out there, and I'm not gonna name any because I like my life. Requests to do interesting things. And maybe if I was younger, I would have considered some of these things, but there's a lot of opportunity there to do interesting things, but we'll go back to that if you want. So some people on the dark web are privacy advocates and hacktivists and things like that. And they just believe in privacy and they don't want anybody monitoring them, and they're not up to anything bad. They just want privacy. But of course, criminal use and activity is going to be one of the biggest things there. And so I want my tracks covered. And there's different levels where, like, if I go into the dark net, I said something called Dread earlier, and that's a website. Anybody can go to it. One thing that's impressive is the CAPTCHAs. We all know what CAPTCHAs are. Like, hey, click on all the squares that have a bicycle in it or something. The ones used on the dark web are so insanely complex and frustrating. And that's by design, because obviously, if I'm a dark web site owner and I can take down my competition, that means more people are gonna come and get their drugs from my website, and I make a lot more money. So there's a ton of like hacktivism, there's government attacks going on, like denial of service attacks, and then there's marketplaces attacking marketplaces, trying to shut each other down. And so these CAPTCHAs have a lot of like machine learning components and things that are really interesting. But there are sites out there that are well known for being repositories of correct addresses for .onion sites. And a lot of these onion sites, they're just weird characters in a row. Some of them come to life and then they die as quickly as they come to life. And that's by design so that you can't find them again. They're hard to track. But like, my point is the marketplaces, they're intended to be discovered. Things like child pornography or hiring a hit person or something, I've never seen a site that does that, but I've certainly seen Telegram offers and stuff. But they're gonna try and be way better about operational security. In fact, I just thought of a side story. I remember one time I was in Australia and I was teaching a class, and some folks from the Australian Federal Police, they were working on a case, and this is public, of course. They were working on a case where a child porn ring, which are, of course, people who share those types of illicit images, they were sneaky in the fact that they were using legal of-age pornographic images to host an embedded photo that's illegal, that's an underage person. And it's something called steganography. Steganography, I'll give you an analogy. It's kind of like if you came into my house and I had a safe sitting in my room, but it was locked. You know that I'm hiding something, but you don't know what's inside of it. So that's kind of like encryption and confidentiality. But if I take that safe and I put it on a wall and I hang a photo in front of it, now I'm hiding the fact that I'm hiding something. And so that's kind of what steganography is, where you can take what's called a host file, and that's going to be the file that's going to host or hold the message or the image or whatever you want to hide. Then we take the file that we want to hide. We encrypt it with the tool, and then these steganography tools will then embed or inject. Oftentimes, this results in something like, let's say you look at a photo on a computer of the family dog. Each pixel in that photo has a number of bits, binary digits associated with it, like there might be 7. And starting from the left, the most significant bits, those are your primary colors and your color mixing. As you go further to the right, down to like the 6th and 7th bit, that's adjusting such subtle change to the color, to the pixels, that the human eye is unlikely to detect that change. You could certainly degrade the quality of something if you're trying to hide something too big in a host, but obviously we avoid that. So back to the point, they were hiding illegal images encrypted inside host files that were legal pornographic images. And so they were looking for a way to identify steganographically altered documents. So basically, is this a file that is a host potentially? And then they would they want to be able to extract the encrypted data out of it and then try to crack the password to then access the data and recover that. Steganography's been around for a long time. I remember a while ago, people were using like Craigslist and other sites like eBay to host photos. And you might see a photo of someone selling a box, just a cardboard box, and they're charging $10,000 for this empty cardboard box. And you're like, why? And they're high-res images, like 20 photos. Like, what is this? A joke? Haha. Maybe even make Reddit. People are making fun of it. But in fact, it's host files for child pornography that is being shared to a ring around the world. And all these people in that child porn ring know to download those photos. They know the password, they know how to extract it, and they're doing this stuff. So of course, a lot of this activity moved to the dark web or moved to different apps. And law enforcement has been very impressive about creating app sharing or file sharing apps where they trick these rings into using this app that was written by the government, which of course is backdoored and they can get access. But it's not as easy, I guess my point is, to find that stuff on the dark web as it is to find like a store to sell narcotics. You can certainly find it. Sadly, it's very available and it's rampant. And that's certainly an unfortunate, sad part of the darknet.
What kind of things are on the dark web? Like you mentioned drugs, you mentioned child pornography. You can hire a hitman on there, I've heard, through one of the hitmen I interviewed. What other stuff is on there?
Yeah, the hitman one's interesting. Like I've never seen a dark web marketplace or site that's like, hey, hire me, I'm a hitman. Because that's
it's people looking to have somebody
yes.
taken out, and these gentlemen will.
Yeah, they'll respond.
Will respond, and there's a price on someone's head.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine 9 times out of 10 that's law enforcement that you're talking to. I've certainly seen those cases before where a spouse hires, obviously, to take their other half out, and they get arrested because it's law enforcement. A lot of it's just what's so important on the dark web, if people do it right, is trust and earning that trust. And again, the operational security of it all. And by operational security, I mean covering your tracks. Like some of the mistakes that this individual, Pharaoh or Lynn, I think his name was, with the incognito market made that caused him to get arrested, was he was logged into his regular Google account that was associated with his personal, like, clear stuff, and he was making inquiries about his marketplace. And just simple little mistakes like that are what gets you caught. And oftentimes it happens because people get lazy, where I've been doing this for so long, you get lazy, I can't be caught, I'm so good at this, and then you get busted. Like this Darknet Bible, it's an interesting read because it talks about things like how to do a dead drop, where if you want someone to send something to you that's illegal, like narcotics, but you don't want to come to your house, how do you do it to a dead drop? And what's the best way to do it if, like, should I use someone else's name that doesn't live at my house? Or should I use my real name if I'm gonna have it sent to me? And it goes through all these different ways in which you can best cover your tracks. But with the cryptography, with a cryptocurrency is another one where if you don't understand how that works very well, and by very well, you can't just be a beginner, you've gotta really understand it. The court notes, the conviction notes, whatever you want to call them, the case notes for this individual from Incognito is literally a guide of how to do better than that person did. He got away with it for years, made tens of millions of dollars, but made a bunch of mistakes. So the next person who comes along should learn from that if they were going to go down that path. I'm not advocating this stuff, but that's what we would do when we're mimicking an attack or mimicking an adversary. And so like the cryptocurrency side of the house, Bitcoin, I think, was one of the main things that took down Silk Road at the beginning. And they got him at, I think it was a library or an airport or something. They like made a loud noise, distracted the guy, grabbed his laptop, because one thing a lot of these dark web owners have is something called a canary. And the canary is basically, if I don't come in, it's kind of like if I have a pet at home. If I don't check in on the dog once a day, if I miss a day, shut the whole operation down. And in fact, something funny about that cable we talked about before, it's got a self-destruct mode where you can tell it to like delete itself, kill itself, cover all the tracks. And that just becomes such an important component of doing anything like this. As professional ethical hackers or pen testers, red teamers, we're supposed to be emulating the adversary to the best that we can. And if we're not doing that properly, then we're doing a disservice to our customers. So that's why it's so important to understand all this stuff. But I know I jump around a bit, but Monero is the safer cryptocurrency to use because of all the privacy built into it. But what people do, or where a mistake comes in, is there's something called Know Your Customer, KYC, where if I want to sign up at a crypto exchange so that I can actually buy some of these cryptocurrencies to then be able to do some of these transactions, they want my ID, because now government's involved. They want your tax info, your social security, or whatever country you live in, the equivalent of. There are certainly some countries that don't have as many requirements, but it gets complicated when I can't just do it at home. So mistakes start to get made where, okay, I've got this Monero wallet, I've got $1 million in it, I got this illegally, and now I want to cash out. How do I cash out? Do I just convert it through an exchange over to Bitcoin and then go to a place and cash out? Because that's going to be traceable. So there's so many considerations, and I guess my point is that's why this stuff usually ends up coming to a bad ending for these individuals. Greed gets involved. Some of them cash out before it goes too far and they get away with it, but most get greedy or make bad mistakes. But as far as other things on the dark web, yeah, I mean, child pornography, narcotics, obviously terrorism. Another example of, I remember, it's one of those things where it's anecdotal, it's hearsay, somebody comes out and says something, even from the government side of the house, but then they pull it back, they retract it. But one thing I remember being said back when 9/11 happened with the trade towers in New York City, was that there was a website supposedly, and on the website it was terrorist owned, so of course it's being monitored by law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and there was a photo of like bin Laden. Imagine you go to the site, photo of bin Laden, but steganography was being used. So the terrorists were using steganography to hide encrypted messages inside this photo, and they continuously re-uploaded the photo. So any normal person looking at the website's like, I don't see any changes. When in fact, yes, it's the same photo, but what's inside of it's not. And they were using this to communicate to terrorist cells. So the dark web made me think of that, because terrorism, of course, is another, obviously, safe haven for them.
What kind of things can the general public do to protect themselves?
From which part?
From all of it.
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot, and there's certainly, we could go for 5 hours and not run out of things to talk about. But, you know, actually, one more thing I was going to say before we go to the safeguards is I was talking about some interesting requests people have gotten. So I'll just say I've gotten some of these requests. I know people have gotten some of these requests. Yes, it's hearsay, anecdotal, whatever, but it's true, and stuff happens where there was one time where a request was made, hey, we need somebody to work with an operations team. Usually it's a proxy or a contract associated with, a lot of times it's like ex-intelligence, ex-law enforcement who start third-party consulting companies and things like that. But get you in and out of a country without clearing customs to do a specific thing. Or I've heard one where it's like drop onto a container ship where we go out and we act like we're servicing the container ship. Supply chain attacks is one of the biggest challenges that companies face right now. I think IBM does a breach statistic report every year, and I believe this year it was like 12, 13, 14% of all breaches were due to software supply chain attacks. And whether it be hardware or applications, a lot of us use open source libraries that are community created. And if there's a vulnerability in one of these libraries and it's being used by lots of different applications and companies, like SolarWinds would be an example, and 3CX are two recent ones, then that vulnerability exists in all these different applications. And if that application is being used by sensitive customers, the government, then they're vulnerable potentially to this issue. But the container ship example is like, if I get on there, if you can get me on there and there's a container of networking products being sent, iPhones, Cisco routers, Juniper, whatever, it's very easy to backdoor the firmware of this stuff because hardware attacks are very popular. Again, things start to get more popular the harder it is to exploit what we were exploiting. So we go after the low-hanging fruit. And hardware users, the end user, tend to be one of the easiest places to go. But think about another example where we use that cable again. I show up to the house in a DirecTV or a Comcast uniform, which anybody can get, UPS, I don't know. Hey, I'm here to install a new TV controller or whatever it is. And I come in and put one of these on, or we backdoor the firmware of that. These things happen. This is not story time. It's just so easy to do this stuff nowadays. Last thing I'll say there too is I'm not going to name the agency, they'll kill me. I was at a place internationally and it was a government agency. And when you go in the building, it's kind of like if you were to go in the NSA as a guest. They're going to check all of your stuff. They're going to scan you just like you're going through an airport security. They're going to take all your computers, all your USB sticks, your phones. You're not allowed to bring any of that stuff in. Well, guess what slipped by? That guy slipped by because they didn't see this as a potential threat. I didn't even mean to do it. And after I left there, I was like, oh, wow, I could have gotten in trouble, but I let them know about it because that's a learning opportunity. So I think back to your question around how people can protect themselves on that side. Don't trust cables out there. Don't trust those power banks that are out there saying, hey, plug in here for free or for a fee, airplanes, wherever it might be. Use your own. Bring those little power banks that you charged at your house and use your own cables because it's too cheap and too easy to do that. I guess understand as well how much of a potential target you are. If you're just, average person, normal person, not getting into trouble, not super high net worth, not a executive at an organization, like low profile, which is not a bad thing at all, then you're probably less likely to be a target. You'd probably be more likely a target of some of these phishing scams and vishing scams and scammer stuff going on. But the more important you are at a company, like if you're an executive, if you're a celebrity, if you have a lot of money, ultra high net worth, if you have access to top secret classified information. I mean, years ago, anybody who completed an SF-86 form, which is a government background investigation form, and did polygraphs and things like that, there was a compromise at the organization that manages all that out of China, and they stole all of that data, all the adjudication data, all this stuff, very personal things. So understanding, I guess, who would want to target you, and how likely you are to be a target, and remembering that people are the weakest link. It's really easy. What's hard is the stuff that I do primarily, which is one of the things I regularly do. Microsoft, every Patch Tuesday, the second Tuesday of the month, they release all the patches for the month to fix all the security problems. I download the patches, so do many other people, good, bad, and in between. Download the patch, and then we do what's called a diff, a differential. We run this tool that's freely available to diff the two files together. And basically the delta is the code changes that fixes the security problem at hand. That's another good point, which is around defense, patching, keeping up to date on patching, not letting your phone go out of date on that stuff, making sure your computers, everything is patched up to date and quickly, because organizations have this challenge where obviously they want to be secure, but they've got to run a business. They don't want to do the screen test. They've got to test things before they just roll out new code, including patches to security problems. So when Patch Tuesday comes out from Microsoft, a big enterprise has a dilemma. Do we push this stuff out immediately without testing? Or do we test this stuff, do regression testing, things like that before we push it out, or some variant of that? And because there's people like me, I mean, I'm on the good side, but there's people like me who are taking that. We're comparing the two files. We've got special software and machine learning to help us that quickly identifies where the vulnerability is. And then the faster we can weaponize that vulnerability, it's a race condition where the value of that exploit is then tied to that duration of time. Because if I can weaponize it quickly and you haven't patched your systems yet, that's going to be my way into your company or into your computer. And again, the tooling out there just gets better and better to make some of that stuff easier.
Excellent. Steve, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge on this interesting topic.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
I wish us all luck from here. Thank you.